September 2023 has more or less officially become the month of the Tata Nexon.
Yeah.
We've just come back from the drive of the Tata Nexon petrol and diesel. We're going to have the launch of the Nexon series on September 14, and now we're coming hour or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just came back from driving the Tata Nexon EV, and no suspense to this analysis slash review. If you want to get the Tata Nexon in its best form, in its latest form, get the Tata Nexon EV.
I want to first set context to the Nexon EV, very important. Much like the petrol and the diesel or the ICE version, this technically counts as a facelift.
Yeah,
But Tushar and I want to call it a half generation update
that'd be fair.
because there's just so much that's different with it. The design's a lot more edgier, it's a lot more sharper. The interior experience is better, quality's gone up. Features are a whole lot better. And there are mechanical changes as well. And I think he summed it up quite well. It is the best Nexon there is, period. It is the one to buy.
Yeah, and that's not just a function of the changes and upgrades, so to speak, that Arun mentioned. Certain changes also run skin deep, and getting straight to the point, right? These are not changes that are necessarily limited to the Nexon EV alone.
Correct.
But we're talking about safety. Because let's face it, terms like global NCAP, crash tests,
Star rating.
Yeah, they've become common parlance, not to a small degree because of cars like the Tata Nexon.
At least on the internet.
Yeah, they did popularize it
Yeah.
quite a bit. And now that you've seen an evolution, not just with the Nexon itself, but also with crash tests in their nature,
Yeah.
we're seeing upgrades on that front. Specifically because the pole side impact is now going to become a crash test requirement if you want to get a good rating. And subsequently, what Tata has done is include structural reinforcements rather,
Yeah.
on the side skirting side of the chassis.
Yeah.
So you are getting additional protection over there because of additional use of high strength steel.
Correct.
And besides that, of course, you do have the standard list of features that we already saw. 6 airbags, you have ESP, ABS, ISOFIX, front and rear parking sensors, and of course certain other safety features like blind spot monitoring, 360-degree camera. But I think those are things we can tackle more in detail when we
Yeah.
get to the features section. What's happened mechanically?
Okay, so mechanically, two components, drivetrain and the battery. The battery itself, that's the same.
Yeah.
Tata Motors used to offer two battery packs with the Nexon EV. That carries on as it is, 30 and 40.5 kilowatt hours.
Yes.
The nomenclature's changed.
Yeah.
Earlier, the smaller battery was called the Nexon Prime. The one with the bigger battery was called the Nexon Max.
Yeah.
Now it's MR, medium range, that has the smaller 30 kilowatt hour battery, and the LR, which is the long range, which has the 40.5 kilowatt hour battery. Since the battery is the same, the charge time remains more or less identical.
Yeah.
Right? The claimed range also remains more or less identical. There is a small uptick, maybe 12-13 kilometers on the claimed number, but that's not a huge improvement because the battery is the same. Where it is significantly different is in the powertrain department, the power unit, the motor itself, that's brand new. It is capable of running at higher RPMs.
Yeah, 16,000 versus the earlier 12,000.
It is a full 20 kilos lighter,
Yeah.
which kind of also offsets the weight addition that all the structural reinforcements have made. And obviously, Tata Motors has played around a lot with the motor itself because it's making more power
Slightly.
on paper. But Tushar and I have been driving the Nexon EV for the day. It doesn't feel drastically different, or maybe I should say dramatically different.
Correct, because the focus with the new motor has also not been about amping up the performance factor or the excitement factor that we often use as cliches with EVs.
Yeah.
The idea was to make this version of the Nexon even more new EV buyer friendly.
Yeah.
Because earlier, certain people would have felt that when you're driving the Nexon, the performance had certain peaks. It felt a little maybe getting people in a position where they would feel slightly off guard with the kind of
Yeah.
acceleration that they would
It
be
was
getting.
jumpy, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and that was honestly a behavioral pattern that we didn't mind all that much.
Yeah.
It did
No,
add.
Because I remember Tushar and I both drove the Nexon EV last when we shot that episode of Drive to Death. Please check that out if you haven't already. And I remember driving the car back home, Tushar and I just acting silly with the throttle just because we could,
Easiest overtakes of my life.
right? And because that car put a smile on your face in the way it accelerated. It would push you into your seat every time. That shove has been muted. It's a lot more somber. It's a lot more friendly, let's put it that way.
Yeah, and that is by design to make the power delivery more flat, and it's not just in like eco mode or something like. It's across the drive modes.
Yeah.
So you may not feel the same amount of drama, but it will be a lot easier to live with, a lot more manageable to adapt if you're coming from a petrol or diesel car. So it'll feel more homely in that sense.
And Tata Motors been slightly generous. They like top speed is now up by 10 kilometers per hour. So earlier you could do 140 in a Nexon EV Max. You can do 150 provided you find the roads to do it.
Importantly, one addition with this is now you have with the Regen modes.
Oh yeah.
So you did get adjustable Regen even with the previous version.
4 levels.
But now you've got those 4 levels moving to the steering.
That is such a thoughtful addition because with the EV Max, the selectable Regen modes had debuted and that switch was placed on the floor console and you have to fiddle around here. Now you have paddle shifters, you downshift to reduce Regen, you upshift to increase it, and you've got 4 levels of 1, 2, 3. 3 obviously being the harshest setting. Strongest setting of Regen. And that effectively also unlocks Tata's one pedal mode, where you do not really need to use the brake pedal. If you get used to it, if you lift off of the accelerator in time, the car will slow down well in time for you to not use the brake pedal itself. But as we've seen in expensive EVs, say like the Volvo C40 Recharge that you and I drove recently, or even the Ioniq 5, you can come to a dead halt in those cars without using the brake. But in the Nexon, that's not the case.
And that is also,
by design.
It is by design because Tata's estimation is that it will be more friendly to drive in crawl traffic. So at the creep speed is set at about 4 kmph, even if you do go to L3 Regen, and it's going to be crawling through traffic. And what I felt, honestly speaking, is 0, 1, 2, those Regen modes are still all right. They're pretty
very natural,
easy to get used to, and it doesn't feel too harsh or too restrictive even if you're driving in the city or out on the highway. With L3, I found it to be better to be used in the city. You can use it on the highway as well, but what you'll find there is the behavior of it, right? And this is kind of difficult to describe in words, but effectively if you take like this as your X point. Generally what we like with these one pedal modes is if I give in say 10% of acceleration and I release the pedal by a similar amount, the behavior in terms of acceleration is equally met with Regen as you start letting off the pedal. What happens with L3 in the Nexon is you're feeling around the point where you're about maybe 5% off the throttle completely. That's when the brake energy Regen starts to kick in. Then you have a distinct moment where you briefly feel like a slight coast and then it starts re-engaging. So it starts feeling like L3 is a 3-stage process. So that could have been a little bit smoother. I'm not going to say it's not possible to live with it, but it could have just been a little bit smoother.
There is a learning curve to it, definitely. It's something that you will get used to for sure, but that explanation, effectively what Tushar was trying to communicate was the Regen needs to be a little more gradual, a little more progressive in L3. It should not feel as abrupt, for lack of a better term, as it does at the moment.
And in keeping with the whole theme of making the car feel more new EV buyer friendly as well. And like we saw with the paddle shifters, there's a little bit of a gamification that's happened there. That's also seen with the drive modes because you still have Eco, you have City, you have Sport. Eco mode is fine for city use. You can sit at gentle highway cruise also. But personally, I found myself sticking to sport mode the most. And that's not just a function of sport mode being, exciting or silly performance, but it genuinely is so smooth that you can have the full access to what the Nexon EV is capable of without then compromising it with a throttle response that's too snappy.
Correct. I think that's a natural segue for us to discuss the ride quality of the Nexon EV. Ride quality in general has been a strength of the Nexon, right? Even when a car has gone from an ICE to EV, it's got added weight. The weight is low down, right, in the overall scheme of things. Very easy for a manufacturer to just make the springs ultra stiff, right, where the ride becomes bone jarring.
And often that's something you'll start realizing when you own the car, not during the test drive.
Exactly. With this, yes, compared to the ICE version, there is that inherent firmness that you feel. You actually hear more of the thuds
than feel them
inside the cabin. At no point, say in case you're planning on using your Nexon EV as a city commuter, taking it on an occasional highway trip here and there, is it going to feel uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Right? The suspension has been tuned very well. The handling is extremely predictable. Now, when you put these two factors together with the kind of performance it has, instant performance that it has, you can have a little bit of fun with it if you want to. But I don't see most owners exploiting this side of the Nexon's personality. But for what it's intended to do, as a commuter, it just does it so well.
But if we are going to talk about an aspect of the car ownership that's going to genuinely be explored by the owners and something that will be useful to them as well, is the tech package, because this is a major highlight specifically with the Tata Nexon EV. And that begins with the new 12.3-inch touchscreen that you have with the Nexon. And this is a big deal for many reasons.
Correct.
First of all, it's because this touchscreen is making up for, well, the Nexon's touchscreen infotainment system was never really a particular benchmark in terms of size, in terms of UI, in terms of operation. This just changes things to a whole new level. It is by far one of the best touchscreens that we've used, not just in terms of real estate, but the user interface, very easy to operate. It has, of course, wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. But the one major highlight with this infotainment system is something Tata calls arcade.ev.
Yeah. I think arcade.ev as a concept is very thoughtful.
Yeah.
What it does is, okay, effectively the touchscreen is running Android.
Yeah.
Okay, it's running Android Automotive.
Yeah.
It's not the same as what Volvo runs. They're running GAS, the Google Automotive Suite, but it is running Android, which enables them to have apps native on the system itself. This is basically a tablet, right? So you have a 12.3-inch screen, you have a Qualcomm processor, you've got 64 gigs of internal storage, 8 gigs of RAM. So those specs by themselves are pretty good for a tablet.
And there's a reason for that, because arcade.ev is enabling a couple of important things. One is you can play games on this infotainment system.
We tried, it's fun.
And I think it's important to first set the context as to what is the point of doing something like this anyway. And one use case, if I were to give you, is going to be what Tata has called opportunity charging.
Correct.
So wherein if you're going to a DC fast charger, and we often say go to a cafe and have a coffee or something. But here, because you have this entire entertainment ecosystem built into it, you can sit in the car while it's being charged and you can play games with somebody who's with you, and just talk about literal games, not emotional. And then you have also got the option of you can stream videos using YouTube. There's Hotstar, there's Amazon Prime. Netflix isn't there just yet, but it might come somewhere down the line. And that's also where the 64 gigs of space comes into play, because individual apps will be updated over the air. You can install them, use them, and we have used them, right? We've used it for listening to music videos. We've used them for watching our own videos, a little bit of narcissism right there. And of course, we've also used them in a use case that will be quite common for kids watching cartoons when they're sitting in the car.
I genuinely see that as a use case. Say you're a parent, you have an errand to run, you can leave the kids in the car. The system has a 1-hour mode. They can watch their favorite cartoons. You can get done with, your shopping or whatever that you need to do while the car is keeping the kids entertained. I'm sure a super introvert is behind this feature where I'd rather stay in the car than talk to anyone, but it just works. So what this also tells me is that Tata's trying to make the entire living with an EV experience a little more relaxing, a little more calming. And another factor that kind of ties into this is that Tata Motors has actually bumped up the size of the AC compressor on the Nexon EV. So it's gone up from 27cc to 34cc. The idea is that it's a bigger compressor. It has to put in lesser effort at, lower loads. So it will inherently be a little more efficient. And that AC is really good.
Yeah, even if you keep it at 1, it still seems like it can get pretty bone-chilling pretty quickly.
Even at the rear.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I think that we should mention is how do all these functions of the infotainment function, and as you may have already guessed, it uses Wi-Fi hotspot. So you can put up your phone there, or you can use one of the 45-watt Type-C USB chargers, maybe put in a dongle that's permanently in the car, and you can run all of these functions. But it's not just the infotainment system that's a big highlight here. You also have the new 10.25-inch digital instrument cluster. That is something we did see with the ICE Nexons as well. But as you might imagine, the interface is very EV-fied, very techified here, specifically with the Nexon.ev. And of course, you have multiple views that you can get there, all the usual data that you can see on that screen. And like we saw with the ICE Nexon, you can have the navigation display with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay seen right there. With Apple CarPlay, you'll have Apple Maps. With Android Auto, you'll have Google Maps over there. Unfortunately, because of Apple's own restrictions, you can't have Google Maps feed over there if you're using iOS.
Correct. Very, very minor. I don't even want to call it a bug, but something that happened when we were navigating back to the hotel. So you know how Apple Maps or Google Maps keep suggesting alternate routes. So when that happens, the map kind of zooms out to show you the alternate route. Now the instrument cluster isn't displaying maps natively. It is simply mirroring what the main touchscreen is showing you, right? So this map has zoomed out, and because of which the map on the instrument cluster has zoomed out. Now you have no clue which right turn you're supposed to take, and there is no way on the steering wheel for you to select the alternate route or zoom back in. So you have to go back to the touchscreen, select the right route that you want to. An unnecessary step that I think can be eliminated. I'm sure there is a line of code missing somewhere that can be patched.
Yeah, probably, because we did share this as feedback with Tata as well, and granted where it's due, they're very receptive to feedback. And apart from these features, of course, you do have the new JBL 9-speaker music system. Absolutely epic sound, even if you don't use one of those specific sound modes. But you are the audiophile here. What was your experience like?
Okay, so there are preset JBL modes, so as to say. Now it's basically a software synthesizing the sound, giving you different profiles. It's playing with the equalizer settings on your behalf to give you a sound what it thinks is best. Personally, I'd switch it off. I'd tailor the sound to what I am listening to. I'd manage the equalizer as per what I like. But in case you can't really be bothered and you really listen to one specific kind of music, say you listen to a lot of hip hop, the bass enhancer sound mode is something that you might like. It has a few thoughtful modes also. Like it's got an audiobook or a podcast mode which amps up the vocals, right? It subdues all other frequencies. Very thoughtful. It's also got something called kids sleeping in the back mode. So it basically puts the fader right up to the front. Rear speakers get disabled. So if the kids are sleeping in the back, the speakers are shut off. Very thoughtful.
It's very similar to what Hyundai and Kia call quiet mode on their infotainment systems. And besides that, you do have the new Phygital AC console. It is a little bit fidgety to use for some people because, see, credit where it's due, the primary functions that you will use like auto, express cool, they're pretty easy to access, and even controls like the blower speed control or the temperature change, that's physical keys that you have over there. But there are certain features that I prefer them to have buttons, especially like the hazard light button. I would have liked that to be one, a physical control, two, more prominently placed. It does have those little indents on the side, but in the event that you need to use it quickly to alert people behind you, it's not all that intuitive to use.
Now, because we've driven the ICE Nexon and the EV Nexon, we've spent a lot of time driving it. I have a different take on these touch-sensitive controls. Most of these controls are something that you might use once in the day, maximum twice, right? You possibly hit auto, forget about it. Like you said, temperature and fan speed is physical, so you can hit it on the go. Everything else there is not something that you would constantly require. Plus, if you do not want to bother with that, there is the Hey Tata feature and voice commands generally now respond the way they should. So you can set the temperature, you can set the fan speed, you can ask it to switch off climate control. You don't even need to take your hands off the steering wheel to reach, right? So that touch panel as a design looks great. I love that every key disappears when you switch it off. It looks like it's a part of that waterfall effect that they're trying to mimic with the center console. So I don't really see that being a huge issue. The feature suite that the Nexon has. I remember you saying in your verdict when you reviewed the facelift Nexon ICE version, said it's actually punching a class above. It's actually going to make the likes of the Creta Seltos sweat because it's got just so much. It's got a sunroof, it's got cruise control, it's got a digital driver's display, it's got front seat ventilation, it's got a banger of an audio system. It's not missing anything. Then there are those EV specific features that have come in, right? V2L and V2V, vehicle to load and vehicle to vehicle. So you can charge up chota mota appliances. Tata was running a full cafe out of it. I don't see anyone doing that. I mean, anyway. But if your kids are playing outdoors, you want to charge up the remote controls, or you want to charge up batteries or something like that. You're out somewhere, photography is happening, you want to charge up batteries, that's something you can do. And if you see a Nexon EV in distress, you can help the said Nexon EV in distress.
Right, because the vehicle-to-vehicle function is via an adapter. You can have it with non-compatible vehicles also. That functionality can be brought in. We don't have absolute clarity on if that adapter for these function is going to be coming as standard with the higher variants, or if it's generally going to be an accessory. But you do have it available if you see
so
the requirement for it.
You can plug that adapter in. There's a switch in the boot that you hit, and you can take charge out of the Nexon EV's battery. You can also set a preset percentage. As in, don't let the battery discharge beyond this point. Give only X% to whatever is being powered from the
Don't be too generous.
Sure. All right. So all of that, the tech package really sorted now. Now we had some glitches with the ICE version, with the smaller 10.25 inch screen, random freezes, stuff like that. But with the 12.3 inch screen, zero issues.
Yeah.
Absolutely zero issues. I like that it worked without a hiccup. Right?
There are some things about that, though it's not a function of the touchscreen itself, but like features that we now have, 360-degree camera that's there. Resolution's really great.
Yeah.
You do get a lot of functionality with that. But you can see at certain times, like with the blind view monitor, for example, you can see that when you're driving and you use that with the indicator, it does feel like it's dropping frame rate at times. So it doesn't
Especially
become...
at speeds that are slightly high. Say if you're changing lanes at 40, 50, right, you see it dropping frames just because there's so much data to process and relay.
And it's not just that, obviously, it's the same issue as the Nexon ICE, wherein if you use that indicator, it occupies the entirety of the space on that touchscreen. So that is also something that we would have hoped to see, that it doesn't become a hindrance, at least when you're using navigation, for example.
I think Kia's execution or Hyundai's execution here is a little better, where the blind view monitor comes straight up into your instrument cluster in a little pod. It's a picture-in-picture there, so you don't lose the entire screen as well. So I think that is something that Tata can consider. Do not use the entire real estate of the screen. Interestingly, what I said in the Car Dekho review today, check that out if you haven't already, it's in Hindi, that the fonts, the graphics on the screens put together and the interior color combination, full baby rangy vibes.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good point for us to start discussing the interior, and let's start with the color.
Yeah, ivory and black, it is the best execution. It is the best complementing color palette for the new design. Straight up.
Concern, white color, Indian climate conditions, dirty jeans, problem, ho sakta hai, but spend a little to keep it up to spec. I think because that white is executed really well, and there's that neutral gray that just contrasts so well, right? The other aspect of this is the seats.
Yeah.
They've been upgraded on both the versions. They are extra soft, extra cushy. They're comfier than the sofa I'm sitting on. No kidding.
Significantly.
Yeah. The front seats hold you well. The rear seat also has extra bolstering. But we were driving the LR, which means it had the bigger battery pack, which means the floor was slightly higher, which means we sat in a slightly knees up position, which means under thigh support was a little less.
Yeah.
And as is the case with the ICE version, we figured that knee room's taken a small hit because of three reasons. One, there's extra cushion on the front seat. Two, the front seat does not have a scooped back. And three, the seat squab itself is slightly longer and it's got more cushion. So all these three put together kind of reduce the knee room that you have by a few millimeters. The saving grace, like you mentioned, is that even if you hit your knees with the front seat, at least it's super soft.
Yeah, and it's not, the person sitting in front of you is not going to feel the knees digging into their back.
Yeah.
And it's also not lost much by way of practicality. The boot is still plenty practical for airport runs, suitcases, weekend trips that you want to do with the family. It's all sorted. So the fundamentals of the Nexon or the Nexon EV, whichever way you want to look at it, completely sorted. But for me, one thing that we cannot ignore is just the design, and specifically with the Nexon EV, because it feels like this new generation, this uptick or upgrade with the Nexon, it began with the ideation of the EV and then moved to ICE, because the patterns that you see on the lower grille, the pattern that you see on the DRS, the patterns that you see on the 16-inch alloy wheels, it all looks so cohesive, and that oxide paint job, little white, little gray, is going into that Nardo gray direction, changes a little bit of texture, a little bit of its perception based on the light available. It's a beautiful color. And then you have those little subtle touches that they've gone for, because the idea behind not going with that teal contrast across the bodywork is sort of two-faced. One was, we don't want the cars to shout out EV anymore. It's kind of trying to normalize the whole electric car arrival, and obviously not having that teal contrast enables a lot more color options that can pair with neutral colors.
So Tushar and I were having a discussion with Tata's head of design, Martin Ulrich, and he said the same thing. Not having that teal color actually liberates him from a color palette point of view. So if he chooses to do a bright red, he does not have a heavily contrasting teal accent. And a better way to look at this is that, hey, if you do want to shout at people saying, oh, look at me, I'm saving the planet, I'm driving an EV, pick colors like the deep teal, that beautiful turquoise that they have, or even this oxide white, right? That really tie up the EV vibe so well.
Yeah, and there's another line with that, if you do want to flex it. There's that one little connected LED strip up front that does that same animation thing with the lock unlock functions, but it also doubles up as a display for the charge status. So when you plug it in for up to a minute, it'll show you the charge status as sort of a energy bar. So that's also a very cool touch, and definitely it's a very subtle flex with the Nexon EV. But one question I have to ask is this, right? We are seeing significant upgrades, not just in terms of the highlights. Standard safety equipment is stronger, structure stronger, modernized, better interior, better looking car. Where do you now see the Nexon EV's pricing sitting?
So let's put the pricing of the top spec into context. With all that you've mentioned, I am willing to pay a price premium of anywhere between 75,000 to a lakh for it, which means we will see the absolute top spec Nexon EV LR, not Max anymore, sit somewhere between 20.5 to 21 lakh ex showroom.
At the top end.
At the top end. Anything lower, I'd be surprised, and it'll be a happy surprise.
Definitely. And I think if you look at 17 to 21 as the price range for the LR, the MR should be sitting in the price range of, I think, just under 15 lakh ex showroom and going up to just under rupees 18 lakh ex showroom. And in that range, I feel both these models are quite reasonably priced.
Also, one final bit. There are three personas that you can choose. There's creative, fearless, and empowered. All three have their own aura or own appeal. None of them really look like mid models or base models. Tata's really done a good job of, kind of personalizing a vehicle. So kudos to Tata for that. That was the long and short of the Nexon EV.
And if you guys have any specific questions with regard to our experience, something that we potentially missed in this, I don't even know how long video that we've made right now, go ahead, drop them in the comment section. We'll be only too happy to answer those questions. And as always, go ahead, like this video if you did like it, share it if you like it or if you didn't, and hit subscribe if you have not already, and follow us on Instagram as well.
We will see you in the next one. Bye.